Hey everybody, I'm really excited about today's episode. I talked with Toby Newman and we had a really great conversation about the power of being a generalist when it comes to learning and development and what stands in the way of adult learner agency. Toby shared his distaste for forced learning objectives, and we collectively thought about the concept of how might we make a specific learning habit frictionless, or at least decrease the friction. I'm also pretty sure my headphones were on backwards for this whole episode. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Toby Newman. All right, welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today I'm so delighted to be joined by Toby Newman, and we are going to get into, I think, some things around, well, it's one of my favorite topics, learning as the broad arc, learning and development, but then I think we're going to get into some mindset shifts, maybe some psychological safety. I've noticed that you're into a lot of the AI stuff, so maybe we go down that rabbit trail. We'll see where we go. But thank you so much for agreeing to come on and join.
My pleasure. No, this is going to be very cool. I think we've chatted a bit, and there's a lot of synergies, and yes, very excited to get into it.
Okay, Toby, we like to start with how did we get connected? What brought us together as new internet friends?
I think it was through L&DShakers. So kind of big shout to them. If you're in L&D, join L&DShakers. It's just a like-minded people that want to push L&D on and help each other. And I think, that's kind of where we connected.
Yeah, Toby is like always in there answering people's questions and helping and supporting people, directing people to the right resources. And it is an incredible community. We've talked about it a lot. And Anna Maria came on a couple episodes back, and she's just incredible and inspiring. And if you want to learn more about communities, I think that her non-course is closed now, but she'll offer it again, that she's walking people through building communities, and from people that are on the other side in that community, there's nothing quite like it. It's so generous and consistently helpful, and even making an impact.
Awards, not award, but from LinkedIn as one of the most active communities that LinkedIn have, which was pretty impressive. I saw something on LinkedIn that said it's one of the most active communities in there, and the amount of generosity in there. And I know this is not just a kind of a big love on Anna Maria and the team, but not just myself, but the time that people give up to give free courses, free conferences. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's very impressive. Free life coaching, free mentoring. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable. Toby, will you tell us a little bit of your background, what brought you to the work that you're doing? If you want to incorporate Blockbuster in there, I saw that way back at the beginning. You might have to explain what that is to some of our younger generation, but take us back into any of your journey. But that stuck out to me because I remember going to Blockbuster.
Yeah, well, Blockbuster is where it kind of all started, really. I mean, because I was working for, I love my films. So for me, working in Blockbusters was literally a dream. I got to, and this is going back in the day, I get to rent free 10 films a week. And I was like, oh, this is brilliant. I love films. And I was an assistant manager in London in Blockbuster. For those of the audience that don't know what Blockbusters is, think of Netflix when you physically have to get off your behind and go to a shop, rewind the tape and post it back in, and then get another one, hope that wasn't broken until you got home. Yeah, the joys of Blockbusters. But anyway, one of my manager at the time just said, hey, can you go train those new people on the till, on the where you get the money? I went, okay, never done it before, but fine. And was showing them how to do it. And I'm like, ooh, this is good. I like this. This is enjoyable. And that was it. And that was 20 years ago, showing my age. And I haven't looked back since. I've done call center training. I've done facilitation. I've done instructional designing. I've done training managing. That's the one thing I love about L&D. There are so many different areas you can go into, from analytics to, consulting and all these different things. And I think recently my couple of biggest passions is learning tech which AI and Chat GDP are like my happy place. And yeah, I see, I'm one of these kind of ultra positive people of kind of it's just gonna revolutionize the world in a positive way. But for me, learning tech in general about scaling capabilities of what you can do already. And recently, I say recent, last few years, I've got much more into well-being and psychological safety. And so I'm currently leading our European arm of well-being and psychological safety. And yeah, figuring out kind of how we can tie all these technology with practical elements of it and stuff. Yeah, so I'm enjoying life. And then obviously, diversifying into my own little side hustles as well, just to keep me occupied.
So maybe we can go into first, let's go into the well-being side of things.
Yep.
One of the sentence stems I really like is if only people knew. So when you think about some of the things that you've discovered in that area, what's coming to you around if only people knew that you're seeing as really
Ooh,
important?
I think for me, it would be pointed at leadership and to say, if only leadership knew the power of investing in well-being. And I'm not saying that because I want to buy all these nice, lovely tools and platforms and stuff for our company, but I've spoken to a few when we were talking offline about the kind of the tick box era of
Yeah.
people just kind of, yeah, we do well-being. And it's just a tick box exercise, and it's just a couple of keywords on a slide somewhere, and that's about it. But for me, is that if you really invest in looking after employees, because we are all employees, we are human beings, although some of us may not act quite the same. We are all human beings, and it's that essence of if you can support an individual, then they are going to give back so much more than everything else. I think it was Richard Branson. I don't think he was the original person, but I like to quote him saying it that you train people to leave and you engage them to stay. And I've always tried to kind of keep that mentality of you look after the human being, and then you don't try and keep them to stay. You don't, yes, you can pay them more, you can look after them in that respect. But if you really want to respect somebody and provide them a safe environment to be able to support themselves, then they'll repay you in ways that you may not even think of.
Yeah, it's making me think about this moment in time that we're at where technology is just, it's been going this way, but I think that ChatGPT just made it so accessible and it was
It's
so
accelerating
out
it. No.
there. Yeah, just this acceleration. And so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is this actionability piece, is how do we make learning not just the check in the checkbox, but make it more actionable. And so you shared a little bit about within well-being, but maybe let's zoom out a little bit. What are the things that you would say to somebody pulls you in to partner with them to build learning, and they're going to the learning objectives and everything and the check in the checkbox and kind of sometimes I feel rushed along. I don't know if you feel the same way,
Yeah,
but like, let's get to it. Well, let's make sure, do we even need a training? And then people are like, well, I hired you to build the training. And I'm like, but do we really need it? I need to
yeah,
understand first, like, if it's, could this be a checklist? Could this be an email?
yeah.
So what do you
Well,
think about
because
that?
well, I mean, a couple of things. So I think first of all, when people say, "Oh, we've got a training need," I'd say probably maybe 7, 8 times out of 10, it's not a training need. It's maybe related to training. Maybe it's a communication issue, and yes, you can train people on better communication, but or it's a leadership issue, and you can train leaders, kind of ish, or at least help them guide the way. But it's not a training as in what we maybe think stereotypically as a training is, here is some knowledge, let me train you on that knowledge, and now you can take that knowledge and be better at it. Um, so yeah, it's not always training. And I think when it comes to the practicality piece, it's, how would I put this best? It's thinking, well, what do the actual people that are doing it want? So yes, you can create objectives and all these kinds of. Actually, it's one of the little things is that I hate putting in objectives And I always tell people, don't use objectives, because an objective means I am telling you what you should learn. And kind of, no offense, but who are you to tell me what I should learn? So I was like, put down, this is what we're going to cover. This is what we're going to talk about, and allow them and encourage them and train them to think about self-development and what are they going to take out of the training and what are they going to do to put it in place. So for me, I'm a big believer in self-development and self-paced learning. But again, you've got to teach people that. You've got to, sounds weird, but you've got to teach them curiosity and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's the shift to the learner truly being at the center of the learning conversation. And people will say that, oh, we're learner centered and things like that. But what does it really mean? And Anna Marie and I talked about even the idea of calling the people that we're working with the learner, as it, puts it into this, I am the expert and you are the learner. And I will, even for those that are trying to be more learner centered, there's still so much language in the structure of the way that we do training and development.
But I would say also kind of, we shouldn't really kid ourselves in terms of most people, if not all people that get into learning or education, usually have an ego. And I'm talking about myself as well. It's because you can't not have an ego that needs to be massaged, because you basically saying, at least for most of us in traditional learning, you want to get in the front of the classroom and go, hey, everybody, look at me, I'm going to train you. That's how we used to do it. And so a lot of the things I talk about in L&DShakers and to other people is that it's not just re-educating the learners, the company, the individuals. It's educating us as learning professionals to say, get out of our own way. Stop being the center of attention and trying to create a program, rather than work with these individuals and allow them to accelerate at their own pace.
I think that's so true. One place that I've seen that play out is okay, so you get pulled into something and you want to be, you're being paid to train or paid to develop. And so you want to add that value. And sometimes it's easy to fall into the trap of more or more complexity. And I have really fought to pay with my clients for the profound insight in simplicity. And it doesn't mean that it didn't take the same amount of time to get there, or if not more sometimes.
I'd say it takes more time.
Right, than just the 50-page complex framework that a big consulting group brings in. But what if, we can really listen to the client? And I think as a nimble individual, there's different roles that we're able to have. And I think one of the places that I find myself often is able to really listen and be nimble and flexible with what tools I bring. So I don't always bring the same 2 frameworks. I have many tools in my tool belt that might be appropriate for the right, client.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that I've got an education, I've been to university, but I've never been an academic. I cannot quote half of the learning models that people talk about. I was in I wouldn't say an argument, but a good discussion with somebody on LinkedIn, I think, that I talked about the 70-20-10 as a model. And he kind of came at me, quite rightly. So, no, it's not a model, it's something other. And then I went on ChatGPT and I said, please name me all the different variants of learning models. And it went, brrr, and I was like, ooh, there's projects and models and algorithms and God knows what. And I just went back to him like, you could name any of these. I don't care. Doesn't matter what it's called. It matters the principle of, in terms of 70-20-10, that you need to do a bit of training, but most of it is focused on getting the experience done and the practicality side of things. And we had a nice discussion about it. I think we lose discourse, but you get caught up too much in these kind of terminology.
I think that goes back to the ego piece, because I think that this is one of the areas where L&D can be, you can fall into, ourselves included, we'll put us in this
absolutely
as the gatekeeper. And one of the things that makes you a gatekeeper is, I know these models, and therefore if you don't know these models, who are you to come in and X, Y, and Z.
But again, that's what I'm putting in my book, is about is the key sense of we are the key holder. We used to be, and we need to get out of our own way.
So then what does our role become?
Oh yeah. So I think the creative side is definitely has to be increased. And I think you said it right, that rather than being a person that does one thing, and that could be, in the past it used to be, I was a trainer of this certification or of this particular process, and that was all I did. And that's fine. But then, other processes come along and you lose business. Then it was, oh, I'm now an instructional designer, or now I am a UX designer. And again, I don't know all the different titles, but you kind of put yourself in those boxes. But I think, just like you said, you need to be much more of a just consultant, and just kind of almost generalist. And I think it's kind of put down to think, oh, you're a generalist. You're not specified. I'm like, yeah, actually, I'm kind of in a better place, because I'm not fixed. I mean, to give you an example, I'm trained on TMSDI, which is the team management profiling, insights. I've done DISC, I've done Myers-Briggs. I know there's a few others out there, but I'm not fit. I mean, I know them, but I'm not saying, oh, you have to do it. Whatever the question is, you've got to do this. And I've been with vendor meetings where they force you down this little path and go, oh, well, that means you can take our service. And a lot of the times I go, no, sorry, you're not for me. I don't want that, and I'll move to something else. But being that generalist and that high level overview of saying I'm just a learning and development person, I think is kind of like a superpower these days, or will be.
I mean, this is a very relevant to me, because I have wrestled and I've had conversations about this with people, of the tension between generalist and expert, and maybe part of it's the online culture that I feel like says niche down. What is your specific, to
find your USP.
And that feels like, I don't know what it is about my personality, but that feels really restrictive to me. And really, I get into recovering perfectionism to think I have to say that I am the expert on X, because I love to continue to read and I love to continue to learn. And it is all those different experiences that I've had that I feel like makes me a really good strategic consultant with my clients, to help them even say, I'm not the right person for you, if it comes to that.
Don't get me wrong, you do need those specific people.
Yes.
With those that level of, because I don't have that level of knowledge. So I can then go, well, I don't know, but I know somebody that does.
Right. And then it becomes a partnership.
Yeah. I think the other thing, probably, if you talk about going forward, is learning tech. Now, I know my passion is learning tech. I'm not saying everybody should dive into learning tech and know what APIs are and all this kind of stuff, but the number of people, literally almost every other day, there's a question that says, my company's just looking for an LMS, or I'm just started to look at a learning, and I don't know what. And there's no training for it. There's no not really anyway. And they're all not saying they're doing it wrong, because there isn't a wrong or a right way, but there's no knowledge there. And I think that's not on them. I think as an industry, we need to increase our own level of knowledge on just what are learning tech, what is the difference between an LMS and an LXP and all these different platforms. Basic things like, what is an API? What can it do? And then going forward is like, not saying we should be coders, but I've said on LinkedIn, the train has already left the station. Yes. You already have to get on it or stand by the side and wave your career goodbye. I honestly think it's that severe.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we need to be coders, but we need to understand technology and what is a difference between, for example, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Would you know the difference between a machine learning and AI?
No.
And I'm not going to try and pretend that because I'll get somebody going, he's telling it wrong and all that kind of stuff. But there is a fundamental difference, because machine learning is simply you're telling the machine to do something and it automates it and it runs and
Okay.
runs, like recommended learning.
Right.
That's a machine learning. AI needs a specific license to run, and it learns as it's doing it. It
Okay.
runs
That
on
makes
its own.
sense. Yeah.
And then you've got LLMs with large language models, which is what ChatGPT is. It's kind of AI, but it's a separate model because it's learning the language rather than taking in all the different surroundings and all that kind of stuff. Again, please, don't at me for people out there.
Generalist.
Yeah,
Generalist.
yeah. But
Enough to be
understanding these things.
dangerous.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
understanding all these differences and understanding, well, when a vendor comes at me and says, "Oh, I've got an AI integrated platform," I'm like, "Really? Okay, where's your license?" "Oh, well, no, actually, it's machine learning." "Oh, okay."
Right.
And that's the kind of defense that we need to have
Yeah.
to push back to say we're getting the right platform. Sorry, I'm going
Right.
to get off my
No, no. I
pedestal on
wanted
that
to
one.
go down to AI because I think it is. So I have some background in ed tech in the K-12 space, and
Oh,
I was the co-founder of an ed tech app in my early 20s. And so I learned
cool.
a lot from that experience. And at the end of that time, well, it didn't work in the end, but right before it didn't work, we had 1 million students using it. So it got to that level of,
Wow.
running all of those things
Impressive.
all running on a Mac Mini, which that was part of the problem. We didn't know any better at the time. So the tech side could have really helped me. But from, that lens, one of the things I was thinking about is I was always kind of frustrated in the K-12 space that ed tech was like its own whole separate conference, its own whole separate thing, and there were certain people that were over there, and then there was curriculum and learning, and that was its own whole other conference, and never the two shall meet. And so at
Yeah.
one point in my career, I joked that I was a therapist in between the tech department in our schools and the curriculum department, because I was like, y'all need to come together. And so I
Yeah.
do training, so on and so forth. But interestingly,
But that
um,
happens a lot in companies as well.
yeah,
I mean,
that's what I was gonna
all the
say.
companies I've
Yeah.
been to, you've got uh, you've usually got IT, technology, as one division. And then they look after, sometimes they look after the learning tech bit, sometimes they don't. Then you've got in your HR L&D team, I've had teams where you've had a separate learning tech team and then a separate team looking after the content that goes into the learning tech team. And then the learning tech team doesn't talk to the IT team. So companies are all over the place
And
with
then
this.
we
There is
wonder
no,
why the learner is not engaged.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I've been in companies where there's literally been 6 different platforms or tools that they need to access to find training. And then we wonder why people, like you said, are confused.
Yeah, and the first thing I learned about user experience when I was working on the app was how do you make it frictionless? How do you make it so easy? Don't make me think, right? And
Yeah,
so how much friction is there between the learner and the learning when there's 6 different tools?
yeah. And
Um,
again, but that's why it's important, going back to that API, that's why it's important for us to educate ourselves on what is an API so that when you can talk to these companies,
right.
they can explain to you, oh, this API feeds from this database to that database and vice versa. So, and I'm not proponing a one tool solves it all, one ring to save them all kind of thing. That's just doesn't work. But what we should be getting into the mindset of is an ecosystem. That no matter where you are in the ecosystem, you'll find your way around it. And AI is going to help that eventually, because rather than at the moment you have to go into that search engine, that search engine, that search engine, and type in presentation and look through 300,000 different unrelated content to find something that might be of benefit to you. Whereas now, again, I was saying this on LinkedIn, my ideal future is I go into a platform and I talk to it. And I'd say, hi, I am in the middle of a presentation. I'm presenting to my manager who's presenting to this on this topic. I know about this, but I'm worried about this little bit. Can you help me? Go. And it will go, done. There you go. Do this, do that, do that. Here's the resource. There's that. Boom. And
Right.
all that's doing is it's connecting all the platforms in a way that we're currently doing it manually.
What do we need to do, maybe generally speaking, to get from where we are to that? Like if you were starting your own company, running that whole piece. And maybe
God
this
help them.
already maybe this already overlaps with some of your role at your company, but what would you say to those? We have a ton of people in L&DShakers, for example, that are in that HR role trying to manage different vendors
Yeah.
that they bring in and I hear in that a lot of this sense of urgency, but always feeling a little behind.
Oh, you're
There's a
always
sense
going
of
to be
that, right?
behind.
Yeah.
You'll never, ever, ever get in front of it, because as soon as you, I mean, like I was talking to one person in L&DShakers to talk about how long it takes for, like for me, we brought in Degreed as our LXP in my previous company. Took me 4.5 years from getting the kind of, hey, we should be doing this, the research, the demos, the RFQs, the requirements, all that kind of stuff took me 4.5 years. And like when I was talking to this person, they were like, I thought it would take like weeks. I'm like, no, 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 no. Like even just the most basic LMS takes like a year if you're going to do it properly. Obviously, you can just turn something on. But to answer your question, I think the first thing would be looking at your ecosystem, not your LMS, not your HRS system, not individual, but look at your ecosystem. What have you got now? And think, where do we want to be? What, not, it's just not like where do we want to be in 6 months, because especially with like things like LMS, they've got a shelf life. They can only do so much. And if you want to have, I've had people like talk to me and say, yeah, we want an LMS that does communities, like you mentioned before with Anna, that wants recommended learning. I'm like, yeah, that's not an LMS. LMS is just, pardon my language, it's just a dumping ground. You put all your content in there and it just holds it for security and so that you can pass an audit. It's basically all it is. Yeah. Everything else of it is just layers where you kind of usability. So understanding your current ecosystem, doing requirements, so going out to everybody as much as you can and saying, what are you doing in learning now? What do you need to do? And then what you can then do is that when you can put that massive big requirements document together and send it out to basically every single vendor out there that you know and go, answer this thing. And they've then got something to like physically line by line go, we can do that. No, we can't do that. Yes, we can do that. And you can now start ranking them, not on some generic website that says this is the best vendor because they paid. I mean, you look at like some of these ones, they're paid a lot of money to say they're the number one vendor of whatever it is. But understanding your own requirements, understanding where your future is, where the company's going, do they want a learning ecosystem? Do they want a learning culture? Do they want a learning, whatever it is, then you need to match your vendors to that vision.
Right.
And I think the big thing, and I know a lot of vendors will agree with me on this, is your vendor is your partner. It's not a vendor. They are your partner in crime. They're the people that are going to, so you need to get along with them. They need to understand what your pains and your challenges are, because you're going to be working with that person in and out for years. And they are going to be working together. So that relationship really needs to kind of go well.
I think that's so important because I've been on kind of all sides of that paradigm as somebody that'd be considered a vendor on the tech side and as the client and as the consultant. And so I do think coming back to the human nature of each aspect of that, everybody is trying to ideally move things forward and help solve each other's problems and want to be partners. But there does tend to be some mindset that can get in the way of that when vendors are treated as less than, or there is kind of that culture of pushing to the extent that you can and kind of taking the humanity out of it. But I want to...
But you mentioned mindset as well, because there's one thing thinking, oh, we want this platform and that platform, that platform, or the leadership saying we want this and want that. But what are your actual learners doing? To give you an example, at least a few companies I've worked for, is that the leadership want this learning culture. They want how everybody's going to be self-developed and we're going to create these communities and it's going to be brilliant. And all the learners, all the employees are sitting there going, so when's my next training? Is it 3 weeks from tomorrow? Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I shall turn up to that and you shall learn me. And that's it. And it's like, So the disconnect
Yes.
between what the actual individuals are looking for. So whenever you're going on this journey, not only is it, us as in learning need to kind of push ourselves, we need to find the right learning tech, but we need to really help the individuals. And it sounds derogatory, and it doesn't mean to be, but you need to help them to train themselves. Because if they're so used to being one way, I mean, I always use the example of you go through school and you're taught to be creative, at least when you're really young. There's a lot of kind of support and, thinking through. Then obviously you go through your high school and your college and your university, well, that middle bit, and it's much more about exams and stuff. But then when you get to university, I've always said, university just helped me to think. It helped me to kind of, I mean, I remember these days when we had libraries as kids, there were things that you had to physically go and get a book and like open it and read it and like make notes on it and all this kind of stuff. But you were taught to have discourse, you were taught to think things through and figure out how to do it. And then when you get to work, no, sorry, none of that, out the window. This is what you do, off you go. And you do that for 10 years, and then we wonder why people have lost that ability to be curious or that to be self-developed. And we need to kind of plug that back into them, because the whole AI thing is going to exacerbate that. So yeah, it's that you've got to do both sides.
Yeah, I think we both have a tagline in our LinkedIn and different places about human potential. And for me, it came from originally in End of Average. He said, human potential is nowhere near as limited the systems we put in place assume. And I've always liked that, in the education space, and also, now in my Building Thinkers company, I use that as a sounding board to think, how can I help unleash human potential? And most of the time that's through learning experiences that are full of joy, rooted in research and experienced in community. But in this bigger, broader sense of being a generalist, I think that it, to your point, happens in different ways. Sometimes it really is in that consulting space where it may not be in a general training sense, but it may be recognizing, hey, this could be a communication issue or a different challenge.
If you look at like people like Simon Sinek, I mean, the reason he exploded the way he did was because he kind of flipped everything and said, you got to know your why.
Yeah.
And people went, oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and then once you know your why, then you kind of go, I've got a path that I need to go down, and now I'm thinking about myself, and I'm now more engaged in my own development, and on and on and on. And it's, I think companies, we talked about us getting out of the way ourselves. Companies need to get out of the way of these individuals, and they can talk about individualism and democratization of learning and all these different things, but they need to kind of put their money where their mouth is and allow individuals to make those mistakes and drive their own future.
Okay, Toby, this takes me to a passage of a book I want to read out loud and get your thoughts on. Okay, so this is from Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And I think it connects to where you just took us. And so he's talking about Olympic athletes, and he talks about Michael Phelps. And so I'm going to pick up at this part. And he says, of course, Olympic athletes arguably practice longer and train harder than any other athletes in the world. But when they get in that pool or on that track or onto that rink, they make it look positively easy. It's more than just a natural extension of their training. It's a testament to the genius of the right routine. So genius of the right routine, we'll come back to that. Yeah. And it says, the way of the non-essentialist is to think the essentials only get done when they're forced, that execution is a matter of raw effort alone. You labor to make it happen. You push through. The way of the essentialist is different. The essentialist designs a routine that makes achieving what you have identified as essential the default position. Okay, so here's my theory. And maybe this is my future niche, I'm not sure yet, but I think that the intersection of neuroscience and psychology and habits and AI have a place here in learning when we start with what is really essential. And we say, okay, instead of just pushing through. So I think people try to get there sometimes through learning objectives or different things. They say, this is what's essential. They need to learn this. But then the labor is just like push it through to make it happen, versus if we design a routine that makes achieving what you've identified as essential the default position. That is more what you were saying when somebody comes to the real moment of need of knowledge or skill, and they're able to access it. And so this default position to me just makes me think about, how do we help individuals, because I think that's where it really needs to start. Individuals think for themselves, what is essential for me to learn in my context of being a whole human? And it might be I need to learn how to meal plan so I have more time with my family in the evenings. Great. Like, go do that, you know?
Yes.
What do you think?
That makes, so two things. I think first thing, that idea of practicing the right way. Because I think years ago, it used to be like 10,000 hours makes you an expert of something. And then
that was
had
Malcolm Gladwell published.
And then the book of grit kind of going, just kind of pushed
Carol
through.
Dweck.
Yes. But then you've got to practice the right thing, because you can practice, and then you practice the wrong thing and you're still going to end up. So I like the fact that they kind of differentiate that. My understanding of what you said is that if you tell somebody that if you want to do X, Y, if you want to be X, Y, and Z, like using your example of like, if you want to be able to feed yourself, then this is the why it's important, and this is this is how to do it, but you give them the end goal, and you say, is that something you want? And I think you also need to give them that starting point. I'm a big believer of giving people the skills of self-awareness, so making sure they actually do know what is good for them and what they want and what are their challenges and all that kind of stuff. But then if you can just say, this is your end goal, and come, and then they'll find their way through all the different obstacles, rather than saying what we traditionally do at the moment is saying, you are doing communication training, it's on Thursday at 3:00, off you go. And you're like, but I thought my communication was fine.
I need to first understand why you're inviting me to this training, because now there's a totally different story that I'm telling myself about all of this. But what is up with my earphones today? They do not want to stay on my head. So I'm going to come back to this one part that's like the default position, because that makes me think that is back to user experience, because what's the default position that people will learn? It's not by tricking them, it's by allowing it to be frictionless and allowing it to be at that point of need and allowing it to be essential and aligned to what they're after. So back to meal planning,
because we put in all these checks, don't we? Like like cattle going through a grid kind of thing. You push them through a particular way because you want them to get to a certain point, whereas you could just have the cows wandering around and it'll end up the same way, just it'd be the cows doing it rather than us doing it.
And think about the way like traditional leadership development programs are set up. It's like, even these like cohort based, and they can be fabulous, don't get me wrong, I've been parts of developing these, but like 7, session cohorts that you go from one to the next. But, what if that isn't the right order for some people? Or what if in the same way that I know all 4th grade students don't need the same skill at the same time, what if all of those leaders don't need that same skill at the same time? And what does it look like to,
that's why
again,
skill
get out of the way?
development is so hard. Because, saying what a company needs on a skill level basis is almost impossible. There are very good companies that help companies think about it. But at the end of the day, and this is, I think you said the same as well before, it's about individualism. It's going back to making sure the individual knows what they want and how to get there. Not that we train that, but they just know, okay, this is my North Star. And then everything else should be easy. We just kind of help them get out of the way. I'm a big believer in leadership for servant leadership, of that kind of, I'm just here to get all the rubbish out of your way to help you achieve.
Right. How can I help you? Not how can I stroke my ego by being up there and getting
out the
really great survey results, but nobody learned anything. This takes me to a recent project in L&DShakers was the Artifact 500. And so the premise of this was bringing the collective community together to build these artifacts. There was like a week span of time when we could all add to this Miro board. And there were some creative constraints within it. And so the thing that came up for me in this that I built a draft of was trying to build something that would transform curiosity into prioritized learning, addressing the problem of learning overwhelm. And obviously this is something, so that's what I came up with. So, so I have a draft of it, which was fun. So you can look at the Miro board if you want to see that. But this came to me because I experience this all the time as a insatiable learner. I see it as both a strength and a weakness. And I'll tell you why. Because sometimes you can get so stuck in the learning cycle that then you stop creating and you stop sharing because you're constantly thinking of the next thing to learn, the next thing. And so this was for me. And then I realized other people need the same thing too. So I'm excited to build it out further. But what I think it taps into is that innate natural curiosity, the childlike curiosity that you were talking about earlier, and the needs that we have. Maybe it is we see a potential promotion that we want to go for, but we need this set of skills. So that natural curiosity plus need equals true readiness for learning. So then, but then there's all this different stuff out there.
Curiosity is just a mindset. It's more like I'm a curious person, but that doesn't help you to do anything.
Right.
It just means that you could know loads of different things.
Well, and that's what I'm trying to build with my artifact. And I don't know if it develops into a course or something, but the steps, the reflective steps to go from what do I need right now? What am I curious about? And then kind of where can I learn that? And who will be my cheerleaders? Where's my community? What does success look like? All of that stuff. But again, that came because there's so many courses out there. There's so much learning. It's not so much a challenge to get the information, but it is to curate it still, I think, is a challenge that people face when they don't know where to grab it from. You were mentioning the 6 different tools within an organization. So finding it is still something because there is so much. But then I think now we're back to the actionable. How do we help our learners, make it actionable? So I just wanted to share with you that concept because I think it connects to what we're saying.
Because I love using analogies for things because that's just kind of how my mind works. And for me, what you're talking about sounds like the difference between an explosion and a rifle, whereas curiosity could just be literally an explosion of I'm going to go find this and find that and do this and do that and blah 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 blah, and you've got no direction and you've got no kind of what to do or whatever it is. But if you then focus all that energy into one point and then give it a direction and boom, then it's off and it's running.
Yeah, I think it's the idea of there could be lots of motion, but no movement, no forward progress if you're trying to go kind of everywhere. And I do think focus and prioritization are rather challenging in our current moment in time because, and actually this comes from Essentialism too. Greg McCowan talks about how the word priority in the 1400s when it first became a word was singular. There was no priorities. And it wasn't till the 1900s, of course, Industrial Revolution, that it became plural. And he says, as if we could bend reality, and have these multiple priorities. And I do think
break it down. Yeah. It's the word is a priority. That's the thing I'm working on. And it's like, the number of times I've had in my career when you get managers or whatever say like I want to do this and I want to do this, and I'll be like, I've kind of learned to go back to them and say, okay, I've got this much time. You want me to do this? I'm currently doing this. Which one? Pick one. I can't do both. Pick one. If you can do this one drops, or I'm doing later. But I'm not going to do them both terribly. I'm going to do one the best of my ability. And then, and I think we've lost our ability, maybe in general, not everybody does this, is to kind of push back and go, well, what do you mean by a priority? And like you said, it's like, it is just one thing. And, going back to this, multitasking and all this kind of fallacy that women can multitask among men.
It's not true.
No, none of us can multitask.
Yeah.
We can do multiple things at the same time, but they're just not done very well.
Right.
Any of us,
You're
that's
switching.
men or women.
You
Yeah.
can task. So it was Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow has this whole section about how multitasking is a myth. And like I have recognized this about myself. Like if I am trying to navigate somewhere, navigating is really challenging for me. So navigating and like talking on the phone and driving, I just really can't do it. I should not do it. I can only
I mean, you
drive
can
and navigate.
do both.
Yeah. But
It's
not
just
well.
either you get lost or crash.
Yeah. Then I end up in a field. It'll be like,
Yeah.
turn left here, and I'm in a field, and I'm like, well, it told me to turn left, and I didn't really process that. Toby, do you want to share with us any book recommendations? I want to also make sure we get to your website and the work that you do. Let's hit on some of that stuff.
So
if you've got anything.
talking about curiosity, I'm not really a big learning book fan. I actually love to read books that aren't kind of anything to do with learning, and it just kind of
That's fine.
like massages that. So for me, the two books I'd highly recommend, and one's a podcast about, it's Freakonomics. Love the book. The podcast has been on for like 4 years. It's got like over 500 episodes, and it is fascinating reading all these different things and just thinking about it. And then the other book is Homo Deus, which is the trilogy of Harari, I think his name is. He did Sapiens, Homo Deus, and then I think 21 Lessons, which is a kind of a combination of everything. But if you really want to know like kind of what's going to happen in the next like few years now, let alone 50 years, read Homo Deus, and it'll scare you, but also kind of think this is happening.
And then tell us about your website and the work that you do, anything around that. Are you looking for clients? Are you looking for...
No, it's
No.
more just no. I've got enough time working for the company I'm with at the moment. But I've got a website, The Never Ending Learner. There's a few, like if you want to have a good laugh, you can watch my videos of my attempts to do some learning. But I'm currently writing a book called The Never Ending Learning Experience. And the whole premise is how do we move away from this one and done and this mindset of just, training is something you do, and moving into an experience that something is with you in a sense for the whole of your life. And maybe that's not possible, but how do we move towards that with learning mindsets and all that kind of stuff? So I'd say it's a labor of love, or maybe kind of it's an abusive relationship kind of love, but it's getting there.
Yes, I've heard that from my friends that have written books. Yes, it is challenging and painful, and then remarkable too to have this thing out in the world. So that sounds so exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is making me think about, just a connection point throughout our time is this idea that you can learn to learn, and you can not learn to learn, and just kind of have things, done to you, learning being done to you. And so it is that shift in mindset, and how can we get all of our arrows pointing the right direction, from our leaders to our HR and our learning and development, and all be on the same page, and thinking about how we can tap into that human potential, not necessarily as a means to the end, but for the very nature of caring for each other as humans. I think that's one of the shifts that's in there, in saying, if we want to live in a better world, each individual is a piece of that world. And what does their potential really look like now that we really understand neuroplasticity and that we can learn new things and we're not limited? So that's exciting.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, obviously through L&DShakers, I help out people where I can with my little bit of experience and stuff. So happy to help where if people need it.
Wonderful. Toby, thank you so much for joining, and I'm so excited to just stay connected in L&DShakers, and I know I'll get a response anytime I ask a question in there. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.